husband and his mother planned his arranged marriage to another woman. I smiled at them over dinner like everything was fine, then quietly packed my bags. I'm Alyssa. Just a month ago, Jaden and I stood in front of both our families in a vibrant cultural wedding ceremony. I wore the dress his mother picked. I smiled through tears as he called me his forever. I believed every word. But last night, I found out they were all lies. A single unlocked phone was all it took to unravel my world. Messages, photos, birthday wishes from his mother to a girl I'd never heard of. The same girl Jaden was planning to marry while lying next to me every night. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just smiled, walked back to our room and told him I had a headache. Then I stayed up all night planning my exit. 'Cause tomorrow they'll wake up to find the wife they betrayed is gone, and she took their secrets with her. 4 years ago, I met Jaden at a volunteer event organized by a local community center. He was tall, kind-eyed, and had this quiet confidence that drew people in. I was handing out water bottles. He was coordinating the logistics. We bumped into each other, literally, and ended up laughing over a spilt box of snacks. It was the most cliché start to anything, but it felt like fate. From that day on, we became inseparable. He texted me every morning with, "Good morning, sunshine," and called every night just to hear my voice. Jaden was attentive, thoughtful, and made me feel like the center of his world. When I told him about my complicated family background, especially how my parents would never approve of a relationship outside our faith and culture, he held my hand and said, "We'll figure it out together." And we did. At least I thought we did. I stood up to my family for him. When things got ugly and my parents gave me an ultimatum, I chose him. I left home with nothing but a suitcase and a trembling heart. He picked me up that night, wrapped me in his arms, and whispered, "You'll never regret this." To show him I was all in, I converted, not because he asked me to, but because I wanted to be part of his world fully. I studied his beliefs, practiced his customs, and even fasted during religious holidays. His mother didn't embrace me right away, but Jaden always told me to be patient. "She'll see how amazing you are," he said. There were hard days, moments when I questioned if I had made the right choice, when loneliness crept in from losing my family. But Jaden was always there, making me laugh, reminding me of our plans. He'd leave sticky notes on the fridge, "Pasta tonight, XO," or "You're stronger than you think." He made everything feel worth it. We moved into a small apartment downtown. On weekends we cooked together. He loved experimenting with fusion dishes while I danced around the kitchen, playing old R&B. He'd look at me like I was the only woman on earth. Once, after a long night of work, I came home to candles, takeout, and a handmade playlist called Forever Starts Now. I cried that night, overwhelmed by how deeply loved I felt. He was there for me during my lowest points too. When I lost my job during the pandemic, he told me we'd get through it. "We're a team," he said, and I believed him. I leaned on him, confided in him, and trusted him with the softest parts of me. After 3 years together, he proposed. Not with a ring, but with a plan. A cultural wedding this year, then a legal one next. "Let's honor both our traditions," he told me. I said yes without hesitation. The months leading up to our wedding were filled with laughter, stress, and dreams. I remember choosing my outfit with my sister, whom I adored. She helped me pick the perfect color that matched Jaden's ceremonial attire. His family seemed to finally accept me. His mother even hugged me after the ceremony, whispering, "Welcome." I remember standing in front of him during the vows, heart pounding, hands trembling. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "I can't wait to spend forever with you." And I believed him. God, I believed him. I even started learning his language, just so I could connect more deeply with his grandparents. Jaden would quiz me every night, laughing when I mispronounced words, kissing my forehead when I got them right. "You're amazing," he'd whisper. "You didn't have to do this, but you did. For me." I was proud of the life we were building. We had a Sunday ritual, morning walks to the farmer's market, picking out fresh flowers and arguing over what to cook for dinner. We weren't rich, but we had something better. A shared vision. We talked about kids. He wanted 3, I wanted 2. We joked about compromising at 4. I imagined us growing old, wrinkled and smiling on a porch somewhere, still arguing over pasta sauce. People say love is blind, but mine wasn't. I saw everything. The cultural differences, the friction with his family, the sacrifices ahead, and I chose him anyway. Every single day. And that's what makes what happened next so soul-crushing. Looking back, the signs were all there, but love has a way of softening edges, turning red flags into pink ones, until they're impossible to ignore. It started subtly, a canceled date here, a last-minute work emergency there. Jaden, who once couldn't go a day without calling me, began to drift. He'd respond to my texts with short, vague answers. "Busy today, babe. I'll call you later." Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. When I asked about setting a date for the legal wedding, he always changed the subject. "Let's not rush it," he'd say. "We just had the cultural ceremony. Let's enjoy this phase." At first that made sense. We were still adjusting, still settling into married life. But months passed, and every time I brought it up, he found a new excuse. "Paperwork's a mess. My cousin's getting married, too much family drama right now. Let's wait till after your job stabilizes." I started to feel like I was chasing something that was already mine. A legal marriage wasn't just paperwork, it was protection, acknowledgement, permanence. And yet, he treated it like an afterthought. His mother's behavior shifted too. Before the wedding, she was cordial, distant, but polite. After the ceremony, that distance grew colder. She'd barely speak to me at family gatherings, and when she did, it was always with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. Once, she asked me in front of everyone, "When are you going back to your family?" Like I was just visiting, not her son's wife. Jaden brushed it off. "She's just old school," he said. "Don't take it personally." But how could I not? I had cut off my entire family for this man, and yet in his world, I was still an outsider. Then came the weekend trips. Jaden started traveling more. "It's for work," he claimed. "Client meetings, site visits, my cousin's wedding." One time he left without saying goodbye, texting me from the airport that something urgent had come up. I tried to understand. I wanted to be the cool, supportive wife. But the more he left, the more I stayed up at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was being naive. There was one trip in particular that still haunts me. He said he was flying out for his cousin's engagement. I offered to come. He said it was just the guys. I let it go, but something didn't sit right. The next day, his sister posted a story at a fancy hotel, the same city Jaden was in. But she tagged no one. When I asked her about it, she said, "Oh, I was just there for work." She avoided my eyes. I started noticing how often I had to explain myself, how often I apologized for asking basic questions. Am I being too sensitive? Maybe I misunderstood. He's under stress. I repeated those lines so often, they became mantras. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find him on his phone. He'd say he was watching videos, reading news, but he always turned the screen away. I told myself it was nothing. That trust meant not snooping. And I trusted him. God, I trusted him so much I silenced my own instincts. There were moments when I felt invisible in my own life. At a family dinner, someone asked when we'd be having children. Before I could answer, Jaden laughed and said, "We're not in any rush, still figuring things out." He didn't even look at me. His mother chuckled in agreement. I remember smiling politely, chewing my food, nodding like everything was fine, but inside something cracked. Even on our anniversaries, things changed. The first year Jaden planned a surprise picnic, complete with homemade sandwiches and a tiny red velvet cake. The fourth year, he forgot. I reminded him gently, hoping he'd laugh and say, "I was kidding." But he didn't. He just looked up from his laptop and said, "Oh, sorry, work's been insane." That night, I sat alone on the couch, eating takeout, watching our old vacation videos on my phone, him laughing, holding my hand, lifting me into the ocean waves. I kept rewinding the same 2 seconds where he kissed my temple, searching for the man I thought he still was. There were fewer "I love yous," and when they came, they felt automated, like lines he remembered he was supposed to say. Affection became transactional. "Can you do the laundry?" came before a peck on the cheek. And when we argued, his apologies became cold and efficient. I said, "Sorry, what more do you want?" I started hiding my disappointment behind humor. I'd joke with friends. Marriage is just two people asking what's for dinner until one of them dies, right? But I was hurting. Slowly. Deeply. Quietly. Even his sister, once my closest ally, became more distant. I used to call her for advice, go shopping with her, and laugh over coffee. But lately, her texts have come late and cold. "Busy. Can't talk now." When I asked if something was wrong, she said, "No, just a lot going on." But I could feel it. Something had shifted. Still, I told myself, families go through phases, that marriages aren't fairy tales, that if I just kept showing up, kept giving, he'd return to me. The Jaden I loved was still there, buried beneath stress, family pressure, and life. I didn't know that the silence I accepted was actually space he was making for someone else. I kept shrinking to fit inside it. I never meant to check his phone. It was late. He had fallen asleep beside me, phone screen still glowing faintly in his hand. Normally, I would have turned it off and placed it gently on the nightstand. I've never been the type to snoop. I believed that trust was sacred and, once broken, impossible to rebuild. But that night, something inside me, maybe instinct, maybe exhaustion, reached past the usual boundaries. His passcode hadn't changed. My heart was pounding as I unlocked the screen. I'd told myself I'd only check his messages with his sister. I wasn't looking for trouble. I just needed reassurance. Proof that everything was fine, that my fears were just in my head. But what I found shattered something fundamental in me. Her name was N, just an initial. I clicked the thread and scrolled. Their messages went back months, far before our wedding. The tone wasn't flirtatious, it was calculated, formal. They weren't just talking. They were planning. Engagement dates, guest lists, dress preferences, her family's expectations, his family's involvement. My stomach churned when I saw the name Mom appear, chiming in about suitable venues and dowry negotiations. They were orchestrating a future together, while I was preparing for ours. One message from Jaden stuck out like a punch. I don't believe in love. It complicates everything. I couldn't breathe. That sentence kept repeating in my head like a curse. This was the same man who just weeks ago had held my face in his hands and whispered, "I love you, always." The same man who promised forever as I stood, trembling in a wedding dress, chosen to honor his culture. The pigeon betrayal didn't stop there. His mother had messaged this girl on her birthday, right at midnight. "Hope your day is as beautiful as you," she wrote, followed by a string of emojis she never once used, with me. It wasn't just Jaden. His whole family was in on this. My vision blurred, my hands shook. I closed the messages, opened his gallery. My own face stared back at me from our wedding day. I swiped. The next album was locked. I typed his passcode again. Photos of her. At a restaurant, with his mother, holding hands in a dimly lit hallway. A blurry shot of what looked like an engagement ring box. All taken while we were building our life. And then came the memory. 3 years ago, I had caught him on Facebook dating, messaging several women. My world had cracked back then, too. He swore he didn't know about the account. My friends made it as a joke, he claimed. I never used it. I was furious, devastated. But I wanted to believe him so badly, I convinced myself to stay. "Everyone makes mistakes," I said. We were still new. I had forgiven him. I had defended him. And now, it all felt like a long, cruel setup. I sat there in silence, unable to cry, unable to think. Just numb. What crushed me even more was the thought of his sister. We had been so close. She helped me choose my wedding dress. We shared secrets over coffee, laughed about Jaden's quirks. If she knew, and God, I now believe she did, then I hadn't just lost my husband. I had lost the one person in his family who felt like mine. I wanted to wake him. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone, to demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I got up. I walked to the bathroom, shut the door, and sat on the cold tile floor, letting silence wrap around me. The betrayal wasn't just in what he did. It was in what I gave up to love him. My family, my faith, my sense of self. And what did I get in return? A lie. A parallel life was being lived while I played the part of a devoted, clueless wife. That night, I didn't sleep. I curled up on the edge of the bed, facing away from him. I could feel his slow, steady breathing, completely unaware that the illusion had shattered, that everything he thought he was hiding had just come undone. Every sound in the apartment felt louder. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car passing outside. But inside me, there was nothing. No rage, no tears. Just this cold, hollow quiet. I kept thinking back to the times he told me I was too emotional, when I cried after his mother dismissed me. When I asked for a timeline for our legal wedding, and he said, "Why do you always pressure me?" When I cooked his favorite dish after work, he ate it in silence, scrolling through his phone. There had been hundreds of little betrayals, before this big one, and I had overlooked them all in the name of love. I remembered the night we signed our cultural wedding papers. Not legal, but symbolic. His whole family had gathered. His mother had placed a bracelet on my wrist, a family heirloom. "Now, you're one of us," she had said. I had held back tears, thinking I had finally been accepted. That moment replayed in my mind like a cruel joke. Now I wondered if they all laughed behind my back, if I were just a placeholder, a distraction, a convenience. I walked out to the living room and sat in the dark, staring at nothing. My mind kept looping through scenarios. What would I say when I confronted him? Would he deny it? Blame stress? Blame me? Would he even be sorry? Then, another memory surfaced. One I hadn't thought about in years. Early in our relationship, I had met one of his exes by accident. We'd bumped into her at a cafe. Jaden introduced me politely, but she didn't even look surprised to see him with someone new. She looked at me, eyes full of something I couldn't name, then, pity, maybe, and said, "Good luck." I had laughed it off. Jaden rolled his eyes and called her dramatic. But now? I wondered what she had seen that I hadn't. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how deeply I had convinced myself that this kind of thing could never happen to me, that Jaden was different. That was what we had that was sacred. How many times had I heard stories like this? Friends who were cheated on, relatives who were lied to. I always offered comfort, saying, if it were me, I'd leave. But when it was me, I didn't feel powerful. I felt paralyzed. As the sky outside began to pale, I realized something else. I didn't even know who to call. I had distanced myself from my own family. My friends had grown quieter since I got married, and his sister, the one person I thought I could turn to, was possibly part of the betrayal. I was alone. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. I went back into the bedroom as the sun started to rise. Jaden stirred slightly, but didn't wake. I watched him sleep for a moment. His face looked so peaceful, so familiar, but now all I saw was a stranger. And it broke me. Because it's one thing to lose the person you love, it's another to realize they never truly existed. I didn't leave the next day. I wish I could say I stormed out, suitcase in hand, head held high, but the truth is, I stayed. I spent the entire morning pretending. I brewed coffee like I always did, asked Jaden if he wanted toast, and nodded when he said he had to run to a work meeting. I watched him put on his jacket, kiss my cheek, and walk out the door, as if he hadn't destroyed me just hours before. The moment it clicked shut, I collapsed. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't sob. I just folded. Onto the kitchen floor, knees pulled to my chest, head in my hands. The kind of pain that doesn't scream but simmers, like an internal erosion. I sat there for hours, unable to move. How had I gotten here? I kept replaying the moment I opened his phone, like a movie scene stuck on loop. Her name, that message. I don't believe in love. His mother's birthday wishes, the hotel photos, the silence in our apartment, all of it crashing into me over and over. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely breathe without feeling like my chest was caving in. Was I stupid? Had everyone seen this coming, but me? I thought of my mom's voice, the last time we spoke. You're giving up too much, Elisa. Love shouldn't cost you your soul. I had rolled my eyes then, full of pride and youthful certainty. Now, her words echoed in my mind, cruel and accurate. I wanted to call her, but what would I even say? You were right? I'm broken? I couldn't bear to hear the disappointment in her silence. And what about Jaden's sister? Had she really known? Was her help with my wedding dress just theater? I scrolled through our old texts, pictures of outfits, silly memes, voice notes laughing about nothing. It felt like reading messages from a ghost. I wandered around the apartment like a stranger, pausing at photos on the walls. Our first trip together, us posing with street food in Thailand, smiling like we had forever ahead of us. What was I even smiling at? Lies, promises he had no intention of keeping? I started to write down everything I had sacrificed, not out of spite. I just needed to see it in black and white. My faith, my family, my career momentum, my voice, my sense of security. One by one I listed them. By the end, the paper was full, and I still couldn't bring myself to leave. Because underneath the rage, the humiliation, the heartbreak, there was still love, still the tiniest ember of hope, whispering, maybe he'll explain, maybe he was forced into it, maybe he regrets it. I hated that part of me, the part still aching for his version of the story, but I couldn't kill it. At night, I lay awake next to him, his back turned to me, breathing steadily. I wondered how he slept so peacefully, how guilt hadn't kept him up the way truth kept me trembling. I thought of the time he made me tea during my migraines, the way he used to sing off-key to make me laugh, the night he held me while I cried over losing my job. He promised we'd be okay. Was that man real? Or just another mask he wore to keep me invested? I stared at the ceiling for hours, my mind spiraling. What if I confronted him and he gaslit me? What if he denied it all? Would I have the strength to hold my ground? The idea of losing him felt unbearable, but so did the thought of staying. I tried journaling. They say writing helps process trauma, but every sentence I started ended with a question mark. Why did he do it? What did I miss? Was I never enough? I stared at the empty pages more than I filled them. I watched old movies we once loved, hoping the familiarity would numb me, but every scene just reminded me of how we used to be, or how I thought we were. Even the background music in the apartment felt mocking. I shut it off. The silence was better than being haunted. I found myself scrolling through her profile. The other woman. She was pretty, polished, soft-spoken in her videos. There was nothing about her that screamed home record. And maybe that made it worse. She looked like someone who believed she was about to be loved, just like I once did. I didn't hate her. I envied her ignorance. One night, I stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. My eyes looked tired. My shoulders sagged. My skin had dulled. Love had aged me in ways I hadn't noticed. Or maybe betrayal just showed me the mirror more clearly. Jaden asked me that evening if I was okay. I looked at him, really looked, and almost said it all. But I didn't. Instead, I said, just tired. And I was. Tired of being the only one trying. Tired of holding up a love that had already let go of me. It started with a message. I hadn't talked to Lena in over a year, not since she gently told me she didn't trust Jaden. We'd fought that day. I accused her of being jealous, unsupportive. She didn't raise her voice, just looked at me with quiet sadness and said, I hope I'm wrong. But now, I needed someone who had once seen clearly when I couldn't. I stared at our chat for hours before typing, You were right, I need help. She replied within minutes. We met at a quiet cafe across town. I almost didn't recognize myself in the reflection of the window. Sunken eyes, brittle smile, the weight of betrayal hanging off me like a wet coat. Lena didn't say I told you so. She just pulled me into a hug and whispered, I've got you. Over 2 cups of tea and a trembling confession, I told her everything. The messages, the photos, the lies, my paralysis. Lena listened, hands wrapped around her mug like she was holding my pain inside it. When I finished, I braced myself for judgment, but all she said was, You don't have to stay broken. That was the beginning. Lena connected me with a friend of hers, a family law attorney named Karina. She was sharp, compassionate, and completely unfazed by my story. You'd be surprised how many cases like this I see, she said, flipping open a notebook. But here's the good news. You have options. I learned things I'd never thought to ask. That a cultural marriage, while not legally binding, still gave me leverage if I could prove cohabitation, shared finances, and betrayal that caused emotional distress. That I had rights. To safety, to dignity, to my own narrative. It was the first time in weeks I felt anything close to power. Karina advised me to document everything. Dates, screenshots, financial transfers, and voice memos. Treat this like a business exit, she said. Clean, prepared, emotion later. So I got to work. While Jaden slept or went on his mysterious trips, I gathered. I exported message threads, downloaded bank statements, and took photos of every wedding gift and household item I purchased. I found emails where his mother called me future daughter-in-law, a phrase that would later matter. And as I did, something strange happened. I began to stand straighter. I started sleeping, not much, but enough to stop the hallucinations of footsteps in the hallway. I changed the lock on my journal and kept it hidden under the floorboards, documenting not just facts, but feelings. I needed to remember this version of myself, the one rising from the wreckage. Lena checked on me every day. Sometimes she just sent memes, sometimes articles are about healing. Once she dropped off a small gift box with self-care items, a lavender candle, bath salts, and a handwritten note that said, You are not what he did. I read it every night. I also started going for walks again, the long, head-down kind where you don't care where your feet take you. I passed the bookstore Jaden and I used to visit and didn't flinch. I walked by a bridal shop and didn't cry. One morning, I looked in the mirror and didn't just see damage, I saw defiance. That day, I opened a new savings account in my name only. I found an apartment listing, small, quiet, furnished, and bookmarked it. I sent Karina the final document folder with everything labeled and time-stamped. And then I wrote a letter. To Jaden. Not to beg or accuse, just to state facts, to say goodbye, to return his promises with my truth. There were setbacks. Some days, I'd catch myself staring at the front door, waiting for Jaden to walk in and somehow erase it all. Some mornings, I'd make 2 cups of coffee before remembering I didn't owe him that care anymore. But I kept going. I started therapy. I was hesitant at first. The idea of unpacking trauma to a stranger felt too raw, too exposed. But my therapist Nia had eyes that didn't blink at pain. "You're grieving the death of a story," she said once. "Not just the man. The life you imagined with him." That hit harder than I expected. With her help, I began to separate guilt from grief, to stop blaming myself for trusting someone who wore love like a costume. I began reclaiming small things. My music, my prayers, my last name. I even called my younger brother, the first time in 2 years. He cried when he heard my voice. "I don't care what happened," he said. "You're still my sister." That was the first time I cried, freely, since the night I opened Jaden's phone. Each step forward was tiny, but together they built a path, a way out. And for the first time, I wasn't walking it alone. I was walking it as someone who finally remembered her own worth. I didn't need revenge. I needed truth. Loud enough to silence every lie that had ever been whispered about me behind closed doors. So I waited. I let Jaden move through the days leading up to his secret engagement with calm confidence, unaware that I knew. He smiled at me over dinner, kissed me on the forehead before bed, packed bags for a business conference that happened to align with the rumored date of his ceremony, and I let him go. Because by then my plan was already in motion. For weeks I had been organizing every shred of proof I had, not just messages and photos, but legal statements, time-stamped emails, screenshots of wedding invitations, family blessings, and most importantly, the full video of our cultural wedding ceremony. I had it all stitched together into a neat little package, a 6-minute video that began with my name, date, and the words, "This is my truth." It showed me and Jaden standing side by side in traditional attire, exchanging vows in front of elders. His mother is adjusting my necklace. His sister was clapping, guests cheering. Jaden smiled as he slid the ceremonial bracelet onto my wrist. His uncle was giving a speech welcoming me into their lineage. I sent it out on the morning of his engagement. I didn't send it to him. I sent it to her. To the woman. He was about to fool her the same way he fooled me, along with the simple message, "Before you say yes, you deserve to see this." I sent it to her parent, too. Their names were on one of the guest lists I'd found in Jaden's phone, and to 2 of Jaden's aunts who had warmly welcomed me months ago, and to the place of worship coordinator, where their engagement was supposed to take place. I didn't include a single word of rage. Just facts, footage, proof. The rest would speak for itself. Lena was with me that day. We sat on her balcony, sipping cold coffee, waiting. Neither of us said much. Around noon, her phone pinged. Screenshots began flooding in from one of the wedding forums. Engagement canceled. Family emergency. Rumor, groom already married. I didn't smile. I just exhaled. Later that evening, I got a message from Jaden's sister. A voice note. She was crying. "I didn't know how to stop it," she whispered. "They made it sound like it was just tradition, that it wouldn't affect you. I was scared. I should have said something. I'm sorry." I didn't reply. Because, sorry, you can't undo silence. The next day, Jaden showed up at my apartment. He banged on the door, called my name like it still meant something. I didn't open it. He slid notes under the door. "Talk to me. I didn't mean to hurt you. You're still my wife." I was. But not for much longer. 3 days later, I left the apartment, moved into the quiet furnished place I'd bookmarked weeks ago. It smelled like fresh paint and lavender. No ghosts. No lies. I changed my number. Filed all documents with Karina. Donated the ceremonial dress to a cultural center. I didn't post anything online. Didn't tell mutual friends. I didn't need an audience. Because dignity doesn't perform. It simply arrives. Weeks later, I heard through Lena that Jaden's name had become a whispered warning among extended family, that his mother had stopped showing up to community events, that the other woman's family was deeply embarrassed, that the video had been shared hundreds of times in quiet inboxes. But none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was this: I had told my story, not with rage, but with proof. I had walked away, not with chaos, but with clarity. What surprised me most wasn't the fallout, it was how quiet my heart had become. There was no satisfaction in seeing Jaden beg, only confirmation that I had been right to leave. No thrill in watching his mother fall from grace, only sorrow that she chose silence over honesty. Even the messages from distant relatives, some apologizing, some just stunned, felt like background noise. I wasn't interested in their guilt. I was reclaiming my peace. That week I bought myself a small jade plant. It sat by the window of my new apartment, soaking in the sun. I named it Begin. I began cooking for myself again, just for me. Recipes I liked. I liked the music. No more fusion dishes to impress anyone. No more pretending to enjoy things just to be agreeable. I reconnected with old friends, people Jaden had slowly distanced me from under the guise of, they don't get us. Turned out, they got me better than he ever did. One night, I hosted a tiny dinner. Lena, 2 old college roommates, and my brother, who drove 3 hours just to hug me again. We laughed, ate too much, shared stories, are not about pain, but about possibility. It wasn't revenge that tasted sweet. It was freedom. And in that freedom, I found not just who I had been, but who I was becoming. A woman who didn't need to be chosen because she had finally chosen herself. Jaden's fall wasn't loud. It was slow, shameful, and impossible to stop. The woman he was supposed to marry never spoke to him again after watching the video. Her parents pulled out of the arrangement immediately, citing irreconcilable moral concerns. The place of worship canceled the booking. Word spread faster than he could spin his version of the story. His name, once spoken with pride at community gatherings, became a cautionary tale. Matt lied to 2 women at once. Married one while planning another. His own mother helped cover it up. People weren't outraged. They were disgusted. Even his professional life took a hit. A colleague who had once admired him quietly withdrew a recommendation for a partnership. Invitations to networking events stopped coming. No one wanted to be associated with a scandal, especially not one so deliberate, so personal. And his mother, once revered in their circles, now walked with eyes lowered. She stopped attending prayer meetings. Her once vibrant social media presence fell silent. Whispers followed her everywhere. She blessed one wedding and planned another. She tried to defend herself, saying she was only following tradition. But no one bought it, because tradition doesn't require deceit. Jaden, meanwhile, reached out in every way he could. Emails, letters, voicemails. Please talk to me. I was confused. He pressured me. I made a mistake. You were the only real thing I had. But I never replied. Because apologies aren't keys. They don't unlock doors already closed. I knew he was unraveling. Lena mentioned he'd been asking mutual friends about me. He showed up at her workplace once, looking lost. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, she said. He said he just wanted to know if you were okay. I was. I was more than okay. I was rebuilding. Still, part of me mourned for him. Not the man he turned out to be, but the man I once believed he was. That version of Jaden, the one who danced with me in the kitchen, who wiped away my tears, who promised forever. Maybe he existed in some brief, unbroken sliver of time. But he was gone now. And what remained was a man, left with echoes of a love he betrayed, a life he could have had, and a woman who had finally stopped waiting for him. Even the people who once championed Jaden, old mentors, family elders, his childhood friends, began to pull away. No one wanted to defend what he had done. You can't build love on betrayal, one elder reportedly told his father during a community meal. You raised a man who thought hearts were disposable. The damage wasn't just external, it seeped inward. He stopped posting on social media. His once frequent selfies with inspirational captions disappeared. Photos with me quietly vanished from his profile, as if erasing me might somehow erase what he did. But memory doesn't delete like that. I heard he moved back into his parents' house for a while, that his mother barely spoke, and his father, embarrassed and disappointed, urged him to fix it. But there was nothing left to fix. And though I didn't respond to his messages, I read the last one. He said, "You were home, I see that now," and I burned it. I closed it without a tear, because I was done offering softness to someone who only valued it once it was gone. People asked me if I felt vindicated. But truthfully, I just felt free. Jaden would live with the weight of his choices. I didn't have to carry them for him anymore. And that, in the end, was justice enough.